Hey guys, it's Miss Vinson. So today we're going to talk about demand. Now, when you think about demand, I really want you to think about consumers and buyers. Now, demand, when we talk about the overall demand for a product, like hamburgers or pizza, that's how much people are willing and able to buy over an entire range of prices. So one of the biggest ideas to get with demand is the difference between when we're talking about the overall demand for a product, which is how much people want to buy over a whole range of prices, and when we're talking about the quantity of a product demanded at one specific price. So being able to differentiate and tell the difference between when to talk about the overall demand for a product and when to refer to the specific quantity demanded at one particular price is a very big distinction that you need to be able to make. Well, first, let's just talk about the law of demand. Now, the law of demand is going to seem like common sense. Think about whenever you're a buyer going to the store buying something. When prices get lower and things get cheaper, you tend to want to buy more, right? And as things get more expensive, you and people tend to want to buy less. So the law of demand says that as things get more expensive, as prices go up, the quantity of a product demanded tends to go down. And vice versa. Whenever prices of things go down, when things get cheaper, people tend to want to buy more because it's more affordable. Now, at the end of the law of demand, we always put that phrase that we learned, ceteris paribus, or other things constant. Because let's face it, when we're talking about human choices and we're talking about consumer behavior, there's a lot of different factors that are going to affect what product you want to buy and how much you want to buy. Could be things like the weather. It could be things like how popular it is. But we just want to focus on how a change in the price of the product affects the amount that people want to buy. So we just want to look at those two variables of price and quantity demanded. So at the end of the law of demand, we're going to say holding all other variables constant, everything else constant, ceteris paribus. If the price goes up, people want to buy less. If the price goes down, people want to buy more. Now let's use an example with numbers. Let's say we're talking about the price for a cup of coffee, and we have different prices for a cup of coffee. Let's say we go all the way from $5 for a cup of coffee down to 4, 3, 2, 1, and then finally maybe a cup of coffee is free. Now, if the price of a cup of coffee were $5 a day, well, I mean, that's pretty expensive. So let's say that there may be only 40 people who would be willing to pay $5 for a cup of coffee that day. If the price dropped to $4, then maybe there would be 60 people willing to buy a cup of coffee at that lower price. And then if the price dropped to $3, then to $2, $1 and free, you can probably expect more and more customers are going to be willing to buy more and more cups of coffee because they're more affordable. So notice how we have these two variables, price and quantity demanded, and they move in opposite directions. They have an inverse relationship. So if you wanted to graph a demand curve, then you would have your X and Y axis. And on your y-axis, you're always going to have your different price levels. So in economics, price always goes on the y-axis. So we're going to list our different price levels. And then on the x-axis, we're going to list the other variable, quantity demanded. To make this demand curve, all we have to do is just say at a price of $5, the quantity demanded of coffee was 40 cups. And so we're going to put a dot right there. At a price of $5, the quantity demanded is 40. At a price of $4, the quantity demanded is 60. At a price of $3, the quantity demanded is 80. At a price of $2, the quantity demanded is 100. At a price of $1, the quantity demanded is 120. And then at a price of free, the quantity demanded is 140. So notice the way I was saying that, guys. At specific price levels, there is a specific quantity of coffee demanded at that particular price level. So when we talk about the quantity demanded of something, we're talking about how much people want to buy at one specific price. We're talking about the individual dots on the graph. When we connect these dots and make our demand curve, D1, then what that shows is how much people want to buy over a range of prices. So demand refers to the overall demand for a product over a range of prices. It refers to the entire curve. Quantity demanded refers to how much people want to buy at one single price. So it's the quantity demanded at one single price. Now notice that the demand curve is downward sloping because the higher the prices, the less people want to buy. As the price falls on the y-axis, more and more people want to buy coffee. So there is an inverse relationship, which leads to a downward sloping demand curve. The next major thing to understand about demand is how to show a change in demand for a product versus how to show a change in the quantity demanded for a product. So let's think about all the different things that might impact buyers on whether or not they want to buy a cup of coffee. One thing could be the weather. If it's really cold outside, people probably want to buy more coffee. Another thing could be the price of coffee itself, right? If the coffee is really expensive, people don't want to buy as much. What about the price of tea? Tea is a substitute good for coffee. Substitute goods are goods that can be used in place of each other, or maybe even hot chocolate, right? So if the price of tea, if tea gets really cheap or hot chocolate gets really cheap, people are probably going to want to buy more tea or hot chocolate and less coffee because it's relatively cheaper. What about the price of maybe a complementary good like donuts? You know, coffee and donuts go together really well, and so maybe donuts get really cheap, and so people want to have something to drink with their donuts in the morning, and so they buy coffee to go along with their donuts. So how about the price of a complementary good? Complementary goods are goods that are bought and used together, like peanut butter and jelly or coffee and donuts. Another thing that could impact whether or not you want to buy cups of coffee is your income, right? Maybe you got a pay raise and now every morning you're going to go buy more cups of coffee because you can afford to. Or if you get a pay cut, you might not go out and buy as many cups of coffee because you can't afford to. So consumer income makes a difference. Now, if we were to continue this list, I'm sure we could go on and on. There could be things like the number of buyers. There could be things like consumer expectations. If you expect the price of coffee to go up tomorrow, maybe you're going to buy some today. Or if you expect it to be cheaper tomorrow, maybe you'll hold off and not buy so much today. You'll buy more tomorrow when it goes on sale. So there's a lot of different things that go into consumers' choices and consumers' decisions and behaviors. Now, if we think about this list, guys, there is one thing on this list that is different from everything else, and that's the price of the actual good itself. If the price of coffee itself changes, then the thing that's special about that is the only thing that can cause a change in the quantity demanded of coffee. So a change in the price of the item itself is the only thing that can affect the quantity demanded of that item. Because remember, quantity demanded is how much people want to buy at a specific price. So if the specific price changes, the quantity demanded changes. Everything else on that list, the weather, the complementary and substitute goods, whether there's a tax on coffee, all those other things are going to affect the overall general demand of coffee over a whole range of prices. We call those the determinants of demand. So basically, when you're trying to figure out if it's a change in demand or a change in quantity demanded, all you have to ask yourself is, did the actual price of the specific item change? If so, that's a change in quantity demanded. Or was it anything else that could affect consumer behavior? That would be a change in the overall demand for the product. Now, when we have a change in demand on our graph, we're going to actually shift the entire demand curve, because when we have a change in demand, we're saying that some event happened that makes customers want to buy more or less at all price levels. Suppose I want to show the increase in demand, in the overall demand for coffee. So we're always going to start off with our regular downward sloping demand curve. And if I want to show an increase in the demand for coffee, then what I'm going to do is take that demand curve and I'm going to shift that demand curve, the whole thing, over to the right, horizontally to the right. The reason why an increase is a shift to the right is because when we move to the right, we're going away from the zero, and so the numbers on the x-axis are getting bigger. So what we're saying here, maybe because of some event, people want to buy more coffee at all price levels. Maybe it's a super cold day and people just need that warm coffee. So because of this, people want to buy more coffee at the high price levels, more coffee at the medium price levels, more coffee at the low price levels. That whole demand curve is going to shift to the right because people want to buy more coffee at every single price level because of this change in the weather. So an increase in demand means you're going to shift the whole curve to the right. Think about it. A change in demand, you're shifting the whole entire demand curve. Now, if we want to show a decrease in demand, instead of shifting the demand curve to the right, we're going to shift it to the left and horizontally to the left. And make sure you're drawing your arrows to show which way your demand curves are going. So it's really important to make sure that you're labeling your demand curve D1 and D2 and that you're showing arrows that show how your curve is moved horizontally, either to the right or to the left. So if there's a decrease in demand, maybe there's a health report that's come out and said that coffee has really bad health effects. You know, it turns your teeth brown and it really affects your brain chemistry and maybe it causes premature aging or something like that. So if there's a news report that comes out and says coffee's really bad for you, then people may want to buy less coffee at all price levels. So at those high price levels, man, nobody's buying coffee now. And at the low cheap price levels, people are buying a lot less. So people are buying less coffee at every price level. So the entire overall demand for coffee has shifted to the left because of this event. Now remember, the reason why it's shifting to the left, the reason why that's a decrease is because when you shift to the left, you're getting closer to the zero, so the numbers are getting smaller on the x-axis. If we want to show a change in the quantity demanded of coffee, then remember, quantity demanded was not the entire curve. Quantity demanded were the individual dots along the curve. So when we have a change in the quantity demanded of coffee, we're only going to be moving from one point to another along the curve. We will not be shifting the whole entire curve. And remember, there's only one thing that can cause a change in the quantity demanded of a product, and that is a change in the actual price of the product itself. So suppose at a high price level of coffee, people are only buying a little bit. But then when the price falls, notice what happens. The quantity demanded increases. So when the price went down, people bought more. We went from a high dot to a low dot. So we had a movement from point to point downwards along our demand curve. If you want to show a decrease in the quantity demanded of coffee, then that's only going to be caused by an increase in the actual price of the coffee itself. Remember the law of demand, they move in opposite directions. So if we want to show a decrease in the quantity demanded of coffee, then what we have to show first is, well, the price of coffee must have gone up. When the price of coffee goes up, when coffee gets more expensive, the quantity demanded of coffee decreases along the x-axis. Now what happened on our graph? Our curve didn't shift. We just went from a low point to a higher point upwards along our demand curve. So when you're trying to tell if it's a difference between demand versus quantity demanded, and that's the really big distinction, guys, you want to make sure you're asking yourself this one question: did the actual price of the item itself change? If so, it's quantity demanded. Or was it anything else that could affect consumers? That means there would be a change in the overall demand for the product. Now this is really the start of our graphing. We'll talk about supply a little bit later and then we'll put them together to create a market. But hopefully this makes sense. Until later, see ya.